really close ties to America.
That's Liberia.
Liberia, yeah. You know what the capital of Liberia is?
Monrovia.
Monrovia, named after James Monroe. Great. Let me go ahead and tell you then about the new imperialism. Really what's going on with this new imperialism is it's happening after 1870 or so. At least certainly the African part of it. The Asian part is probably a little bit earlier than that. It is really quite unprecedented in its scale and how rapidly this happens. If you think about the first wave of colonization and exploration, that happened fairly rapidly too, over a period of decades, let's say. But this happens 1870-ish to about 1890. They're able to take over Africa, which is a gigantic continent, in a very short period of time. And there's reasons for that. Really similar reasons to the first exploration and colonization. Technology. The European technologies enable both periods of time to happen, if that makes sense to you. You might remember some of the technologies of the Spanish or the Portuguese that make that happen as well. You don't have to write all this down. Maybe you just were thinking of these things too. And so I just want to, this would be some of the things that I would think about for contextualization, what you guys just did. But, like Naren was telling us, it's the Portuguese and the Spanish. They're looking for the Indies. They're looking for a new spice route, so to speak. Portugal, we kind of forget about Portugal, I think, because we get sort of obsessed with Columbus or the conquistadors and the Aztecs and the Inca. But the Portuguese also create these trade forts all over Asia. They get taken away by the Dutch eventually, but they're there. They're doing their thing. They're just not conquering Asia, and I think that's why we somewhat forget them. Spain is dominating the Americas, if you think about it that way. And then Britain and France also, as you know, are taking over parts of North America. They are settling in a very different way, I think, not using the natives as slave labor. The French have a kind of nice way of dealing with the natives, right? The English tend to wipe them out, push them away. So the Dutch then come along with their golden age. They steal a lot of what the Portuguese had in the East, and they have a lot of profit from that. Remember too the Columbian exchange of the meeting of these continents for the first time with Columbus, and then sort of a triangular trade being established with slavery and some silver coming out of the New World and sugar as well. Here's what I was telling you about with the technology. The new technologies. I really like the idea that earlier steel and guns and cannon were part of the reason why the conquistadors could conquer. And I'm going to try to make a symmetrical kind of argument that it is technology at this point in time that enables the Europeans to conquer as well. In terms of transportation, we've got the steam engine being placed on ships, eventually railroads. Imagine railroads in Asia, railroads in Africa, built by the Europeans for their purposes. So they're bringing those things and being able then to travel much more quickly in these places that they're taking over. The steam engines on boats is allowing them to get to places quicker. It's allowing them to chug up rivers into Africa until there are cataracts or like waterfalls that they have to maybe move their boats around somehow. When we get this period of time of electricity with the Second Industrial Revolution, we have new means of communication, like the telegraph. And it might seem kind of bizarre to think about this, but there are transoceanic cables being laid. They are actually putting on the ocean floor cables to enable continent to communicate with continent. This is happening, in the Second Industrial Revolution period, 1880s, 1890s. Imagine that. Ships going across the ocean and just laying cable on the ocean floor. Crazy. Multiple cables all over the ocean floor. They're still there today, I'm sure, rotting. These weapons that they're producing are also much improved on what we had in the past. So you guys are familiar with the musket, right? And how you have to pour a little powder in, the musket ball and the ramrod and that whole thing. That takes a long time. Around the period of time of like the Civil War or some of those German wars of unification, they start to come up with faster ways of loading rifles, breech loading rifles. You can kind of see it there. There's a bolt. You guys can see it. There's a bolt that you pull back, and then you place a bullet that has been manufactured in a factory, and you push that bolt forward, and you can fire. Pull the bolt back, the empty shell is ejected, you put a new bullet in, push forward. It's pretty rapid firing compared to the old, muzzle loading kinds of weapons. So that in itself is kind of a game changer, if you think about it. Like I said, I'll show you on Thursday a kind of battle of breech loading rifles versus guys who have spears. And it doesn't go very well for the guys who have spears, as you can imagine. Let me blow your mind for a moment with a machine that is also a gun. It's called a machine gun. And I know you guys know what a machine gun is, but it's more horrible and impressive than you think, I think. Imagine that you have this thing that just spits out bullet after bullet after bullet. No longer is the problem like killing massive numbers of people with this thing. The problem is actually feeding it and keeping it fed with bullets and not having it overheat. It's crazy. If you ever get the chance, it's kind of fun to fire a machine gun. I recommend it. You pull a trigger, and the thing is just, it's truly a machine. It smells like oil. It's jerking, and bullets are just flying out of it. It's the craziest thing ever. Makes you feel very powerful. So, the machine gun. 1880s or so is when this thing is first developed. And once again, when it's brought into a fight of people with spears, or even people who had muzzle-loading guns, boy, the battlefield is forever changed. Small group of men, 3-4 guys, feeding one of these deadly machines is going to be able to kill thousands, sadly. There's also some medicines. Remember I talked about chemicals yesterday? There's some medicines like quinine that allow people from Europe to exist in Africa without getting terrible diseases like malaria. So you can see these technologies that are being created at the Second Industrial Revolution are directly affecting their ability to take over Africa in particular. There's a bunch of motives, there's a bunch of causes. We talked about the 3 G's for that first period of time. I think those 3 G's can kind of be changed or updated or maybe be reinforced. But I think that in the second go-round of exploration, colonization, new imperialism, we have a kind of more complicated, more questioning kind of motivations. It could be, and these are all just questions, people place different importance on these different motivations. It could be all about economics. Not so much gold, but we'll talk about what some of those economic things could be. It could be about this new idea of geopolitics, how space is important for power. Maybe that has to do with like number 5 and taking over territory. But geopolitics, you take over areas because they are strategically important to you. Or maybe it has to do with nationalism. Nationalism is launched out of maybe like the French Revolution or even before that, but certainly in the French Revolution, the French get a bunch of nationalism. It gets the Italians to have nationalism. It gets the Germans to have nationalism. Eventually it gets the Slavs to have nationalism. Everybody's feeling nationalism. And then this Darwinian sort of thing that's going on, this Darwinian nationalism, the survival of the fittest nation is starting to be an idea around this period of time. It could also be about media, kind of fake news sort of things, or the media getting involved in the quest for other places and promoting it, cheerleading it. And the masses are now reading newspapers and are very excited by that. Or finally, and this kind of goes along with Darwin, is the idea of white man's burden. It could also be sort of like the God bit of God, glory, and gold. It's the idea that white people are at the very top of the Darwinian hierarchy of races, and that white people have the duty, the burden to go all over the world and civilize people. Teach them to be more like Europeans. So, in terms of economics, and by the way, you guys at home, you guys at class can stop me and ask, or I'll just roll along.
Who wrote The White Man's Burden?
Rudyard Kipling.
That Jungle Book guy?
Yeah, Jungle Book guy.
Nice.
Which makes me always, and I'll talk about this, which makes me always want to go back to the Jungle Book and look for overtly racist things in it. Even the cartoon version that I saw as a child, because obviously I didn't actually read the book, but I think there's some pretty suspicious things in there. We'll get to him in just a sec. Yeah. So how about the search for natural resources, especially in this second industrial revolution era? You want to find tin. You want to find, I don't want to go with tin too much, you want to find oil. You want oil for your combustion engines. You want oil for lubricating machines. And there are parts of the world in Asia, there are parts of the world in Africa and the Middle East that have oil that you might want to get a hold of. Another thing that is a very important product, maybe the most important around oil or before oil or after oil, would be rubber. Rubber comes from rubber trees, literally, and they have rubber tree plantations in tropical areas. It becomes super important for things like tires, but then also gaskets and various kinds of things that would go inside of a machine. There are also a number of thinkers, of economists who have ideas about why this second why this second era of imperialism is happening. There's a guy by the name of J.A. Hobson who worries a lot about this new imperialism. He thinks that it's capitalism, investors, capitalists, who are investing in high return ventures all over the world. And so, think about it. Somebody who has a bunch of capital that they want to invest. Maybe they want to invest that in an oil company that's looking for oil in Africa, or a railroad that is being built in China. And if they can get a return on their money, if it's somewhere kind of uncivilized and wild, then maybe it's a more risky venture, and then maybe a more profitable venture. That's what they're looking for. Capitalism is hungry, and capitalists are hungry always for the highest return. So that's what J.A. Hobson is saying. Turns out it's not really right. Most investors just want to invest in their home countries and not send their capital off to odd places. Lenin, the famed revolutionary, who we'll talk quite a bit more about when we talk about the Russian Revolution, Lenin thought that this was about capitalism trying to save itself. According to Marx, the capitalists will overproduce in their really productive factories, and there won't be anybody to buy the products that the factories are producing. You know why the Europeans can't allegedly buy the products that they're producing themselves? I'm going to go with David Ricardo's Iron Law of Wages. Allegedly, the factory workers don't make any money, therefore they can't buy their own products. That's obviously nonsense. And then to further the nonsense, how about this idea? They're looking for markets. They're looking to sell their factory-made products around the world. So African people are going to be buying those products. Are you scratching your head for a second? Or Asian people are going to be buying those products.
Not contradicted, so.
Yeah, right? So it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but these people are allowed to have their opinions. There is kind of a similar idea to that. Why don't you create a colony somewhere? Let's call it, Australia or New Zealand or South Africa or Canada or something like that, and then have this kind of sheltered market. The Australians can buy products from Britain, or the Indians, once they take over India, can buy products in Britain. The Indians can't set up a tariff barrier of any kind, right? So maybe having colonies out there would be sheltered markets, and you could sell your factory-made products. Maybe that makes a little bit more sense to me. Does it to you too? Australians could buy some things. Maybe some Indians could buy some things. I don't think Africans can buy some things. By the way, are you guys reading Things Fall Apart?
We just finished.
Yams. All right. Only India is profitable, really. Only India is a place where the British are able to sell a lot of things and for that to make a difference for them. The other places that get taken over by all these various states actually cost the governments more to take them over and run them than they're getting out of them. So economically speaking, it's good for the capitalists, but it's not so great for the home country. And by the way, the British make profit off of India because they collect taxes there. There's a lot of Indians paying taxes. Geopolitics is another new idea at this point in time, and once again, it really has to do with the idea that a place is strategically important. Certain areas of the world are more valuable just based on where they are, what they are next to. And then there's kind of like a weird domino effect. Maybe that's not the right word. But think about this. Think about Britain looking at the globe and thinking about which areas they want to take over so that they can protect other places. France does this too. France has Algeria right across the Mediterranean Sea. They get involved in Algeria, if you remember, in 1830 with Charles X trying to distract people. And then French people start to move to Algeria. It becomes more or less a part of France. There's a lot of European white settlers in this North African territory of Algeria. Well, they get kind of nervous that other European nations will encroach upon Algeria, and so they start to take over vast tracts of the Sahara Desert to keep other Europeans out. The vast tracts of the Sahara Desert are pretty much useless to France, but they feel like it protects Algeria. Or Britain. Britain is really quite concerned with keeping India and keeping a lifeline to India going back and forth. The French actually built a Suez Canal through Egypt, which makes the trip to India a lot faster for the British. Therefore, the British feel like, now that the Suez Canal has been built, they need to take over Egypt. They put pressure on Egypt and eventually take control over Egypt. Once they've taken over Egypt, they kind of get worried about the Nile River, and the Nile is the lifeline of Egypt, and so they start to kind of encroach, go south in Africa to take over more and more and more of the Nile River, so that nobody could dam it up and basically make Egypt dry up and blow away. Eventually, they're taking over places like Kenya, the headwaters of the Nile River. So they're taking over a ton of territory, and if they just stop for a moment, they'd say, "Wait, why are we doing this?" And the answer is India. Britain is really quite obsessed with their navy, with their fleet, but others start to think about the power of fleets and navies as well. There is I believe he's American, an American by the name of Mahan, who is a person who writes a thesis about the importance of navies and fleets, and how every great empire, every great power has had naval power. Once again, it doesn't always work out. I'm sure you could probably think of some great civilizations, some great empires that didn't have an effective navy. But Mahan says every great power needs to have a navy. People read that, and before you know it, people are agreeing with it, and navies are getting bigger. There's a kind of arms race to see who can have the largest number of large ships. There's an increase in naval spending and navy influence. At this point in time, the ships are burning coal. Therefore, they have to take over bits and pieces of the world to create coaling stations, like Hawaii, for example. Maybe you bring a whole bunch of coal to Hawaii and deposit it there. When the coal-fired ships sail to Hawaii, they fuel up, and then they can sail off to another place. Maybe you need another place. What would be another good place for the United States to take over? In Asia, for a coaling station.
Guam.
Maybe Guam. Eventually the Philippines. They're going to go to war with Spain in order to take over the Philippines. So coaling stations to protect the naval. Let's not forget nationalism. To me, nationalism makes a lot of sense. Why do you want to take over foreign territories? Because it makes you feel glorious. It makes you think that your nation, that your people are fit for survival. They're competing with others for national prestige and this sort of Darwinistic competition. There's also the idea as the amount of territory that is being taken over increases and the number of territories that are left to be taken, there's sort of this panic that ensues. Oh my gosh, the French and the British have taken over 50% of Africa. Let's not get left out. Let's grab our stake of Africa too. In fact, the Germans have a kind of a funny word from the Middle Ages. It's called Torschlusspanik. It's the fear of a closing gate. They're referring to a period of time when all cities were surrounded by gates and walls. And if you didn't get to the city before it got dark, when they shut the gate, you're left out of the city at night to be, assaulted by brigands or bandits or whatever. And so people who were traveling towards the city had to run for the gate before it closed. It's the same thing for the scramble for Asia, the scramble from Africa. Don't get left out. The gates are closing. The British and the French are taking over everything. Hurry, grab your slice of China. Grab your little bit of Africa before it's too late. Finally, too, I mentioned Charles X. 1830s, doing all these jerky things, doing all these ultra-conservative things and getting in trouble for it. He tries to wag the dog. He tries to distract people with overseas kinds of affairs and maybe like winning a war or grabbing territory. This is a great thing to do. If you can successfully win a war, or if you can successfully take over a place, it makes your people happy. They're going to support you more. And in this era, when the masses are more and more important, this is what all the nations start to do. Bismarck gets this, and as do other realpolitik. Well, this probably won't surprise you, but the media creates opinions. It influences opinions. And it doesn't always tell the truth. Fake media starts back at this period of time. But the newspapers are a big business. They're big corporations. And they are trying to make as much money as possible by selling as many newspapers as possible. And they do that by, it's no different today, I think. The news makes things more exciting. Even the weather. Have you guys noticed this? Like, it seems like if you ever watch the weather on the local news, they're always sort of making you feel like the end is coming. It's going to snow 16 feet tomorrow, or it's going to be minus 200 degrees. They want you to believe that, so you get all upset and continue to watch it. It's the same kind of thing that's going on here, but magnified. They're trying to sell newspapers by making the news more exciting and by creating drama. They create drama by making conflicts over colonial issues or conflicts over exploration or conflicts over new imperialism. People want to read, what happened today? Did we win in Africa or did those other guys win in Africa today? Did we back down in the face of their threats or did we threaten them and they backed down? It's called the yellow press. It's nationalistic. It's pro-country. It's pro-imperialism. J.A. Hobson, the economist guy, is back again. He criticizes this. He's obviously an anti-imperialist. The psychology of jingoism. Jingoism is this kind of patriotic chauvinism my country's better than yours. And we're going to prove that by taking over territories, by making you back down, and so on. This is in the newspaper everywhere, in all the different countries. I'm pausing again. I'm rapidly firing things at you like a machine gun. Questions?
What's that photo?
Comments? That's a photo of a bunch of British guys. They have a machine gun and they have their rifles as well. They're extending the empire with their technologies, proving their superiority over primitive people by slaughtering them and teaching them to wear socks. Here's your white man's burden. Once again, this goes along with Darwinism that I introduced to you earlier, that white people in Europe and in North America are finding themselves to be superior to other people around the world because they're the most industrialized, the most capitalistic, and they feel like they need to, I joke, but I don't really joke, that they need to teach people to wear socks. And you know what the wonderful thing about teaching these savages to wear socks is? Who makes the socks? The white people do, and they can sell them to other people. So the idea is, it's kind of like one of the 3 G's again. It's kind of like God again. But I'm going to tell you, it's not quite the same. Can you imagine it's not quite the same? In the first go-round, the God bit is really quite literal. Spaniards go out believing that there is one God, one faith, and if you don't have it, you're going to burn in hell forever. In the late 19th century, not quite so sure about God anymore, right? Some people even question his existence. But a civilizing mission, it's your moral duty to get out there and teach them probably Christianity, but really it's about being more civilized. Sadly, it's really quite a racist belief and a Darwinian belief all kind of bundled up together. There are Christian missionaries who are going around the world trying to enlighten people. Usually they're pretty annoying. You know, they show up to people sometimes who have their own system of belief, and then the missionaries show up and say, well, your system of belief isn't right. Why don't you adopt my system of belief? And sometimes they end up in trouble. So there's this cartoon here. But it's true. Missionaries get into trouble. Local people defend themselves and their own faiths, and then the missionaries telegraph back to home and say, we're not being able to do our missionary work here. Send troops. And then troops show up. And before you know it, the country is involved in taking this place over and suppressing people. But this is Rudyard, a part of Rudyard Kipling's White Man's Burden. The very end bit is really pretty harsh. Is somebody into reading poetry and would like to read that for us? Somebody have a good poetic voice? You guys at home? Do you guys at home want to read that? Everybody's looking at each other in class.
I could try.
Doc's going to do it.
Take up the white man's burden. Send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness, unfluttered folk and wild. Your new caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child. Ouch.
That part really hurts, I think. Half devil, half child. Not good. But, a very present kind of belief that they are helping people by taking them over and teaching them, as I say, to wear socks. India is a really key to this story, a key part to the story for Britain. Really, Britain worries a lot about 2 places. They both start with an I. India and Ireland. That's right. And it's kind of a similar situation in a weird way. The Irish need to be controlled and economically exploited, and the Indians need to be controlled and economically exploited, or, taught to wear socks. What's odd is this. For a long period of time, it's not Britain who controls India. It's a company. It's the East India Company that is able to sort of worm its way into India and influence various Indian princes and take over bits and pieces of the Indian subcontinent. They have their own army, in fact. They have generally kind of like white officers and then native Indian foot soldiers. These foot soldiers are called sepoys. And at one point in time, around 1857 or so, there is a mutiny, that's what the British call it, or a revolt of the Indian troops against their East Indies colonial masters, so to speak. This is a kind of native nationalist revolt against the treatment that they're getting from British people, from white people. For a long time, these sepoys are treated, they have a kind of better life than many of the other Indians because they're working for the British. Some of their advantages start to get taken away. They get upset by that. They revolt. They try to kill the British people who are in control of them. And Britain, the country, then comes to the rescue of the East India Company and reestablishes control in a particularly brutal way. You can see that in the image there. The British officials came in 1861. Britain takes over India, the country of Britain, removing the East Indies Company. These are some of the people who had been involved in this either nationalist attempt to gain independence from Britain or a revolt, depending on which side you are on. They attached people to cannon and blew them to bits. They wanted to make sure that the mutineers, the rebels, the nationalists, understood that it's like biting the hand that's feeding you, in a way, right? We're here to offer you civilization. We're here to make things better for you. And what do? How do you try to thank us? You revolt against us. You deserve to be blown to bits by a cannon. Well, this is the beginning, really, of an Indian independence movement that'll just keep on going into the 20th century. We'll talk about that later. But as I say, Britain really worries a heck of a lot about India. The Crimean War, which we sort of barely touched on, is trying to prop up the Turks against the Russians because, in a huge geopolitical sense, they want to keep the Russians out of the Middle East. Once the Suez Canal is built, then this is why the British get involved in Egypt. And there is a lot of capital that's flowing out of Britain and into India in particular. J.A. Hobson is British, and so it makes sense that he's sort of obsessed with the idea of British people investing overseas. In fact, India is a kind of sheltered market. 20% of British manufactured goods go to India. And in 1876, Benjamin Disraeli, the conservative prime minister, does something for his queen that makes her very happy. He makes her Empress of India, in addition to being Queen of Britain. Wow.
Sweet.
It's very sweet. I heard a statistic from a video that I watched about Indian colonization in the British India. I think it was something like there are 2 million British people who are buried in India. Isn't that a crazy number to think about? There were lots and lots and lots of British people who went to work in India, quote unquote civilized them, and then came back. It's a major way of making your way in the world. Yeah.
On that last slide, it looked like the British Empire extended into Pakistan,
It does.
Bangladesh, and also Myanmar. Right?
Yep. Yep. At this point in time, India, it includes Pakistan, it includes Bangladesh, it includes India in the middle as well. And they do take over Burma or Myanmar and parts of China, in fact. Actually, I'm going to stop right there. We'll do China when we get together on Thursday. And then tomorrow's bit about this British guy, Cecil Rhodes, and his ideas about how the world should be blatantly, it doesn't even get any more blatant than this. Blatantly imperialist, blatantly racist. Good times. You guys at home have any questions?